My first guest in the studio with me is Layla Hollender, founder and I guess president of TradeRiver USA. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
I'm glad you could be here. It's my pleasure as well. The first question I ask every guest is, what motivates you to get up in the morning and go to work?
I would have to say two things. One is excitement and adrenaline. And what I'm going to say is excitement because I get to get up in the morning and I understand that the product that we offer to our client base is really something that is transformational. And the adrenaline piece is actually being a startup and everything that entails, and every day tends to be a different day.
So how long have you been in business?
This business here in the United States has been on since 2015 that we've gone live. We beta tested in 2014. So we are a young company, about 2.5 years old at this time.
So what is it that you do? So the listening audience has an understanding of what TradeRiver USA is.
Okay, I probably need to answer that in two parts. So the first part is our definition would be that we are a paperless online platform, specifically providing direct funding and services between buyers and sellers, enabling them to do trade finance and supply chain finance directly on their basis, and we empower them to do so. And the buyer can get funding from us through this platform up to 120 days, and the supplier gets paid 100% at the time that the buyer has accepted the payment obligation from the supplier. Now, having said that, I think I just like to regress and talk a little more about historically how we came about developing this platform.
Well, my next question was, how'd you get started and why'd you get started? So please go ahead.
So it's primarily historically, in terms of trade finance, it is an area that has tended to be very documentation heavy. It's been, in terms of the financial institutions have always touched each piece of the supply chain. Means you needed bills of lading, you needed letters of credit, as well as title of the goods. So what you had was constantly these financial institutions basically creating these bottlenecks in terms of the actual trade transaction. And back in early 2000, some associates and I looked at this structure and said, what if we just looked at it completely differently, forget how it's been done for centuries? How can we facilitate this and really become buyer-centric? So we look at the buyer as our client. What could we do to facilitate this process?
You really set about to challenge the status quo.
Absolutely.
In buyer-seller and transactions.
Absolutely we did. And so what we figured, is there a way that we can remove that third party and disintermediate and have the buyer and seller really be in charge and choose what it is that makes sense for them, because they're the ones who know their product and they understand their service. So it makes sense to get out of the middle. So we decided, how can we do this given how everybody looks at this product at the moment? And so
I just want to interrupt here because I know from my experience in the international publishing business,
yes,
the roadblocks that bankers could do, and probably even worse now with regulation, interference they put in the transaction of doing business. So I'll just leave it at that for anybody that's having been there. So what you're doing sounds very interesting. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but please go ahead.
So what we did is we pretty much redesigned the approach, and we said, okay, we get out, we can recreate all the pieces of a trade transaction, but we're going to do it online, and we're going to have the buyer and the seller be directly in communication. So, and we allowed the buyer and the seller to determine at what point they really needed the funding along the supply chain. So in essence, and we do it, by the way, without any security. So we do not request a UCC filing, no liens, and we do not take title over the goods. And we do it as well for services, which no one in the industry does at the moment. So,
but you're relying then on the buyer's
absolutely
creditworthiness in order to underwrite the process.
Absolutely, we do. So we look at it this way: if you've managed your company well, we are going to reward you for that. And the way we will reward you is we trust you as a client. You've done business with this supplier probably for 12 years. So we enable you now to have this direct relationship whereby the funding and the financing is really taken out of your decision-making process. So it streamlines it in the way that makes the most business sense and allows you to grow.
So can you give I know the process. Some people out there don't. But can you give an example that might help explain it a little bit clearer?
Well, I can give you one example. For example, we had a client who was buying electronic parts for their manufacturing facility out of China. In this particular case, the Chinese supplier also required a deposit of approximately 50%. Normally, the buyer would have to come up with that 50% and pay for it, and then pay for the rest once the goods came on shore. In this particular case, they could place a basically online for the purchase order. We do not say at what point you can accept. You can accept goods in raw form or at any stage that makes sense for you.
So on that part, the agreement between buyer and seller, you're not interfering with.
No.
They set the terms of when they are going to exchange ownership and when they're going to get paid and all of that kind of thing.
The commercial aspect of the transaction is left to the two parties completely on their own. We do not get involved with any kind of dispute or commercial aspect. We really just help them facilitate online. They can make it as paperless as they want. They can upload documents if they so choose, but we really leave those decisions up to the parties involved. So in this particular case, we were able to basically fund for that deposit, and the buyer chose to repay us in 90 days. And so that gave it time for this electronic part to be manufactured in China and send it to the U.S. And they had the part and could place it with their buyer prior to having to pay us on that deposit, as an example.
Yeah.
And then the other 50% was then up for 120 days, and they could wait for full payment.
So,
from their
but
buyer.
it helps their working capital. They're able to pay the supplier up front if need be, and not have to pay you until they start selling and getting receivables in from selling the product and or services they're providing their customers.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Okay.
They can wait.
Another question I do have, and because we're almost out of time. If you were giving advice and you're in a startup situation 2.5 years, excuse me, what would be one piece of advice someone like you is interested in a startup that you would give them?
Mm-hmm. I would actually probably have two.
Okay, please.
One is, I would say, have a kitchen cabinet. So in other words, your closest associates or friends, and have them, support you while you are deciding on your product or service, et cetera, because they will be a great sounding board. And the second advice I would have is, don't plan just for when you're the startup and you start, but plan for growth, because your main issue is going to be when you are successful and you need working capital to continue.
Now, how can listeners who are interested in your services reach you?
They can go to TradeRiverUSA.com. They can reach us that way, or they can give us a call at 443-759-7119. And the companies that we provide service to are for sales of $2 million to $50 million.
Well, Layla, thank you very much for being here.